Good morning, everyone. I'm Varun. Apart from the introduction, keeping that aside, I'm data engineer by heart, been in this industry for over a decade, passionate about this field, and I like having a lot of conversation around that as well, right? Uh, Also, one more thing that I want to point about myself is I am a big Formula One fan. I don't know how many of you are. Quick raise of hands. Any F1 fans? All right, quite a few, but I think the conversation will be interesting. So what I want to start off with, consider that, okay, Formula One is a high-speed race car. It is the fastest car that can, go. It takes around, it takes the top speed has recorded has been 353 kph in, I think it was in Imola, if I remember well. It's upcoming weekend. So the thing about Formula One is the amount of data that is generated every corner, every millisecond, it's tremendous. It's like no other sports on the planet, right? Again, you can debate with me, but I'm being a fan, I'm a little biased about that as well, right? So what happens is there is no differentiation in how much data you can capture across teams, right? So 10 teams participate over 24 races now, and each of them keep capturing tons of data, gigabytes, terabytes of data every single day of their processing. Now, what differentiates them is not the amount of data they capture, but how do they utilize that data, how their different teams utilize the data, right? So consider you're sitting on the pit wall, and there is a race that is going on, and everyone is fighting for the track position. There is tons of data that is flowing in. The race engineer is talking to the race driver, and he wants to understand what should be his next strategy. The data is there. Data is there in the storage. How do strategy team take care of that data? How does the race engineer take care of that data and utilize that data? Uh, the point is not, hey, as a data engineer, I stored the data. So the point is, how do data engineering team or the strategist or the race engineer understand, interpret that data, and provide a lot of contextual information into it, right? So I'll deep dive more into it, but essentially how we are looking at data platforms is it's not just about storage anymore, right? So speakers who have already been on the stage, they shared a lot of insights into let's not just start building pipelines. It's a world where you have to stop building pipelines. Also in the second last question, there was a talk about context is what drives these agents a lot, right? But I'll also add on to that, context has always driven decision making. It is just that we as a data engineering community haven't taken notice of that. I'm coming from a background of when we used to call data engineering as ETL, extract, transform, load. That's what I used to call myself. Back in the days, 13, 14 years back when I started, I just didn't know that where my career will go. And right here, I'm talking about data engineering, right? So it's a weird place to be in, but I think from ETL all the way to data engineering, I think what not coming our way, we don't know. But what is important for us to understand is the data itself has been evolving a lot and the decision making as well. All right, so this is where we are, right? So our data used to look back in the day when I started, data was on the first left or maybe on the second diagram. Simplistic, take the data, feed into your systems, do analysis, and you're happy with it, right? Now this is what data looks like. This is literally what I scribbled. I thought this is the best representation of how the platforms look like these days. It is nothing beyond that. So what got us to this dilemma, right, of messed up data all along, right? So one is there have been an overemphasis on keep building long-term strategic programs. So leaders like building strategic programs and keep investing on that, and that has been the case all along, right? Not a lot of focus has been put on value-driven engineering or value-driven thought process or how you can add value to your business, right? So I remember working for an investment banking company back in the day where we were building or adopting them to AIML, AML, FATCA, those kind of regulatory bodies, right? Back in the day, my only job was to, hey, I work on Informatica. I just want to give data back to my team and the target, and they'll take care of it. I don't understand what the end use cases are, how they're utilizing it, what FATCA is, what AML are, anti-money laundering. I just don't care about all of that. There is this big shift that is happening from there and moving towards more of understanding those contexts, right? Now, then we move towards tool proliferation, where there is a lot of conversation around how do you build adjacent tools, not just tools that replace or become better or add more, value to it, but more and more adjacent tools, right? And then we move towards more around uh, adding more rapidly evolving and AI/ML driven infrastructure, right? We all knew that more or less where we stand, this reality that has hit us today, and I think 2.5 years back as well, in terms of getting value out of the data and how agentic systems are making things more complex. Because at the end of the day, we are looking it as a query that, hey, user will hit a query, we will provide them data. But with every query, there is so much information that needs to go out, right? Because earlier, what used to happen is any ML system, traditional or BI system, and I think you all know it. I'm being rhetoric here, but I still want to point that, because there are a lot of young engineers also sitting out there, and it is important for them to understand is it's not just about, hey, give me a sales number for a particular region on a specific date. It is also about understanding what that user is, what date are they talking about, what region are they talking about, what specifics are they talking about. So the questions have become a lot open-ended right now. So when you have open-ended questions, your data that you have captured, it is not enough, or the data you have captured in a specific format is not enough anymore, right? So if you have to rewrite the playbook and think about how do we look at systems, right, and how do we build the data platforms of the future, and I think future is here. And I'm not claiming that we have decodified or done everything that is possible out there, but there is an attempt for us to understand how data platforms will move towards, right? So one is understanding how our shift has to go from pipelines to products. I know we have been talking about data products, right? If you have been in this field for some time, and if you're talking to your business stakeholders, everyone wants more control over their data and want to understand more details about their data. So take a specific example where you have a customer 360 that you need to build, right? So the reason for that to build that is your marketing team wants to drive more personalization, more campaigns, and want to target your customers better. So in order to do that, back in the day, what you will do is you will just say that, hey, I'll create a data mart, which will house all your customer data, and that's about it. But now what has happened is there is a shift towards understanding a product mindset in that data itself, right? So you have to build not just a data mart, bunch of data marts underlying your customer 360 to make sure you drive value, whether it is loyalty, whether it is through point of sales, whether it is through n number of customer transactions or customers coming into your store, etc., right? And it has to be varied formats. You just can't say that I'll rely on the traditional warehousing systems, but you have to have warehousing on top of that, put your knowledge graphs, your vector DBs, et cetera, right? I think you all know about it already, right? I'm sorry. Now, from there now, it is not just about building platforms for AI, it is building platform with AI as well, right? So what I mean by that is understanding what kind of workflows you can embed, right? So I think there was a conversation around how we can start doing code conversion using AI, right? So traditional methods of migrating your code itself has changed. So in the earlier session of Snowflake, you also saw that there are dynamic tables getting created. There are Salesforce as an example that was taken, right? Salesforce Data Cloud, for example, has come up with all the integration points with multiple platforms like Snowflake, Databricks, of the likes, right? So that the data sharing becomes much easier. And it is not just about building for AI, right? Because you have to understand AI demands a lot of data. It is impossible to traverse that amount of data from your source systems and the amount of investments you have already done. So a lot of the technology providers are also going towards and making sure that they give data sharing as a methodology and not data transformation or moving the data around as a methodology for future needs, right? Very simplistic simplistic approach, but we didn't crack it. All the time when the data we see, we just go and build pipelines, right? That's a shift that is happening now, right? The most important part, I think which I have been pained a lot. So I joined MathCo like 4 years back. Prior to that, I was just looking at it as, hey, I'm a data engineer. I'll care about technology. I'll just push the data into the target. I'll not care about anything else. But boom, I joined MathCo. Everyone was talking about context. Everyone was talking about business problem. Everyone was talking about what value we can drive for the customers. And I was like, I'm in a very different zone altogether. So I had to relearn and redo a lot of my thinking in terms of how do I look at business problems and start decision and build data, not look at data and then think about what decisions it can drive, right? So I think the paradigm shift that has happened, or the transformational shift that has happened, which I think you all are already aware, is how do you look at right side and then go to the left, rather than just looking at, I'll pump in data and I'll make sure that that is available and not look at anything else, right? So that's where it is important that context just does not become noise, and agents, tags, etc. I'm not an AI expert though, but I try to read and understand some of these details out. But from my understanding, I know that you need a lot of context. And I give you an example. If you have to query something, it's an open-ended question. I can go and query anything I want, right? I'll go to an Indigo website and I'll query whatever I want about my travel information. No one can stop me. So if that is the case, then in that case, we have to make sure a lot of these data that we are pumping in are really of value, and there are a lot of context that is driven through that data, right? I've been talking a lot about context, right? So let's try to define it, right? So how we look at context, and I think it's a common phenomenon as well, is broken down into 8 different areas of thinking about context, right? I'll start with our favorite, metadata. We all, in the world of data engineering, metadata is like our super favorite thing that we all do. But what we miss is, with metadata, there is a lot of nitty-gritties and details that needs to be added now. Metadata cannot be an afterthought anymore. It has to be embedded into your pipeline. If your stakeholders, or if your managers, if your leaders, whoever are saying metadata, I don't have an investment for governance metadata, stop working then and there, I would say. There's no point going forward, right? Because without metadata, without tagging your information, you just can't drive any value. So consider a scenario, right? OK, we'll come to that. First, I want to finish my thought here, right? Second is domain knowledge, right? So like I said, when I fell into MathCo's lap in terms of decision making, there's a lot of issues with in terms of understanding the domain itself, right? I just knew data. I just didn't know domain. But every single customer, like a retail CPG customer, I work with a lot of retail CPG customer, they have very different nuances of how they define a lot of metrics as well, right? So how do you take that across different systems and understand that and embed into your knowledge base is very critical. So we are working on those such kind of frameworks, although conversation for later. Then I think there was a lot of conversation around when you query certain information, what kind of RBAC policies you will apply, right? Role-based access policies, for those who are not already aware. So it is important to understand whether that particular person asking that question is the rightful owner to ask that question. It's easy to say that, hey, I'll give access or not give access to the table. But consider a world where the data is coming from all different kind of databases, all different kind of data sources, and in the future, because of data sharing, delta sharing, whatnot sharing happening, how will we control if we don't have control over our user personas or the RBAC policies or any other access policies for that matter? So as a data engineer, we need to take note of that, and every time we start building pipelines, every time we start thinking about this information, these are the things we need to start worrying about, rather than just worrying about building the best pipeline with the best throughput, low latency, and being the most robust pipeline out there, right? We can't be working as a, an engine of a F1 car. We have to be working more as a strategist of an F1 team, right? Where we understand the data and we drive those value. Very difficult, but something that we have to start doing, right? Then the other thing is that interaction history, right? So like conversation history of purchases history, et cetera, the frequently asked questions that people have set in, the feedbacks that you collect from customers, all of that also has to be embedded into your pipeline, right? Then moving on to business workflows, right? So understanding what kind of constraints you have in your entire business ecosystem, right? Being a supply chain, let's say, system, how do you understand what kind of constraints your entire supply chain system has? How do you embed that into your document? Because customers will ask questions. Your users will ask questions. How will you make sure that those questions are translated into useful actions, right? Then I think intelligent assets are more around like all the ML models that you're building, right? How do you tag them? So take an example of like ML Flow as an open source system, right, that allows you to do a lot of these orchestration of your ML pipelines, right? If you do not take notice of or start building your use cases on top of that, it becomes very difficult to understand how to go from there, right? Then another thing is some specific tasks that you have to perform, right? That can also be a context in your overall thinking, right? Where there are SQL query logs that are coming in. If someone starts understanding as a site reliability engineer, if you want to try to understand what kind of issue that has happened in your entire system, if you don't understand or push in those logs into your system and store that diligently over a period of time, it becomes a challenge. Now, the ownership you can talk about, it sits with the site reliability team, not with data engineers, but I would still say that process that data, store it in a representation format is the job of a data engineer, right? And I think we cannot talk enough about real-time data in the context that it provides, right? Because I think whenever the data keeps streaming in, it's not just about taking the data from your source and just pushing it in the lowest latency possible. It is also about how do you embed more and more information, right? So take an example of retail and CPG industry, where a lot is driven by, and it is so dynamic, and it is driven by a lot of customer, how customers behave, what kind of market trends are going on, what seasonality you are in. If your users start asking real-time questions on the data that you are pumped in, and you're not contextualizing it with the real-time information, right? That there is a holiday season coming in. So you will contextualize your data, or maybe tag, or you will feed in more and more information, then I think we are losing the plot, right? So give you a very realistic example, right? So I think we all know that people will start asking questions of, okay, what are the monthly sales from ISEC, for ISECs, right? Now, your system doesn't understand what ISECs is, right? Although your MCPs will go and fetch where it has to fetch, but you have to feed in those information, right, as to what ISECs is for your particular use case, right? We all know it, but are we really looking into it and making sure we take a note and really putting effort into tagging and extracting, putting metadata into those systems? At least in my limited experience so far, I've not seen a lot of focus going there, right? So just wanted to highlight that as well, right? And I think there are a bunch of other details out there, which you all are already aware. I don't want to go into it, right? So then how do we do it, and how does it redefine data engineering, right? So we can't be looking at pulling the data from source system, putting in raw, bronze, silver, gold, and just building a data mart, or just let's build a semantic layer, or let's use certain warehousing system like a Snowflake or a Databricks or Synapse Analytics or whatnot, BigQuery, etc. Right? It is also about how do you start understanding the relationships between your data. So like model relationships, right? Not just looking at rows as your simplistic information, right? Building ML-ready and relevant information, right? So what ML-ready is like, feature store is as an example, right? So looking at customer loyalty score, right? So that cannot be an afterthought or built outside of it, right? It has to be embedded into feature store. I still contest with internally with a lot of my colleagues, but I still feel that these are all the jobs of data engineers, of building these feature store out, etc. Right? Because they understand the system better than anyone else, and I think we should take pride in that, right? So yeah. And I think another thing is context-enriched ETL pipelines. What I mean by that is, let's say your data is flowing in, right? Like I took an example of retail CPG. Feeding in real-time information of, let's say, a COVID happened, right? So feeding in that information within your pipeline, embedding that into it, is much more impactful rather than an afterthought of how it will be done later, right? Joining tables is very easy, but the kind of systems we are looking at and the kind of information AI systems are trying to extract, the burden on the data platforms will keep increasing every single millisecond that we go, right? So the more and more information we can pump in during our entire phase of information, like all the way from raw till the gold layer and maybe beyond 100 different layers that we use, the more easier it is for us to move forward with it, right? So if we have to talk about 4 to 5 guiding principles, right, of how we can look at modern data platforms, then in that case, I think the first I would start with open standards that we are seeing, right? I think we already saw the keynote from Snowflake speaker that Apache, Polaris have kind of come into existence now, right? And there are wrappers that are getting built around it, right? We already know Delta Lake, right? That is coming in, right? So we have to start adapting more and more. Again, I'm being rhetoric here, but I think it's important for us to keep fixating on these points and understand that modern systems cannot be built on your systems of the past where you are tying everything in one single box. You have to make it much more open and much more federated in nature as well, right? That's where I think, again, we can have a very solid debate on that data mesh come into picture, right? Although in our experience, we have not seen data mesh being readily adopted across or 100% adopted in any of the environment. But I think the whole concept of giving your product level details and having control of your domain, that concept is very powerful. And that is where a lot of the systems are moving towards, where they want control over their domain rather than just control over their data in a specific zone, right? Then again, building low latency systems have also been critical, but I think one thing that has shifted is how multimodal systems are being built right now, right? So take an example of, some of you would have known about Azure Cosmos DB, for example, right? It's a multimodal database, right? So how can you start leveraging those sort of information and not give it an afterthought that, hey, I want to build a knowledge graph or I want to use a document database. I'll keep it, maybe use a JSON within a warehouse system rather than utilizing some of these systems, right? Multimodal systems for that matter, right? So I think some of these decisions have to be taken. There are a lot of investments that go into it, but the more open and the more business-driven thought process we put into these systems, the better it is for chances of us to succeed for such systems, right? Then governance, like I said, back in the day, I remember, again, from my experience, governance was just about two things. One was security, one about quality. Quality, we couldn't do it because we didn't have time. That was always the excuse we gave. And security is something we don't care. It is for the security team to do. And no one cares about data security unless it's a pharmaceutical banking customers, right? Again, retail CPG, we can have a debate all the time on that, right? How secure the data always is. But now the governance shift has happened where if you see lot of platforms are coming with easier ways of doing governance, right? So take example of Unity Catalog or Snowflake Horizon, for example. I think there are a lot of things that are getting embedded into the system which is allowing for easier governance, tagging, more descriptive metadata being aligned to your entire table, column, your model level details are being captured, right? So why not start utilizing that, right? Then I think ops, AI ML ops is very critical, right? ML flow I spoke about, which is a component of AI ML ops. But what happens after your model has gone into production? How do you train? How do you retrain? How do you make sure your DevOps pipeline don't break in the future, right? So those are all very critical guiding principles, right? And I think context I've already spoke about why it is critical, right? Now, where does context engineering fits into it, right? So I think it's a new terminology. When even I was researching few months back, I was surprised that, okay, are they going to take our job as a data engineer, right? I'm always scared about my job being taken by some other engineer for that matter, right? But I'm secured that way because I think if you look at this entire transition or history, right, all the way from domain thinking, right, I think building in those context models like the customer, transaction, and product, if we just look at separate entities, it will not work anymore. The customer has done certain transaction to buy certain product. How do you model that relationship? Maybe through a knowledge graph. That could be a way of thinking it, right? I'm not saying that is the only approach or the right approach, but that's one way of thinking it. And why it is important is whenever there is a query that is fired into by our human agents, so to say, whenever such queries are fired in, they would want information in one go. They will not wait for joins to happen. They will not care about whether you have information about a product or not. Again, very, very naive example, but I think you can extrapolate and understand what I'm trying to say here, right? Then I think in terms of federation, real-time signals, capturing that, I already spoke about. I don't want to spend too much time there. And then I think it is also about how do you build in your rule-based delivery of context systems, right, and align them with policy. And then finally, sorry, I have some less time, but I'll go a little faster. I want to talk about what kind of, okay, I still have time. So, okay, I'll move in. So now if I have to talk about what is that, if I have to look at the outcome that I want to achieve, is relevant and trustworthy AI output that I'm looking at. And if I go all the way back, then the way we think it is in a very naive and a very structured way is, first we have to understand what kind of context sources we have, right? Structured, unstructured, metadata information, external. So we can divide it into business, data, and external context, right? That's how we can divide it. And then we basically assemble the context layer in terms of what kind of database we overlay on top of it, right? Whether it's knowledge, vector, it's traditional RDBMS, it's a document store, et cetera, right? And then from there, feed it into your AI systems, or your MCPs take it, right? I'm using MCP as if I've worked forever on that. I have not. I just learned it recently, right? So it's a recent phenomenon anyway. And then, of course, governing and monitoring the context, so making sure that even after your pipelines have been released or your systems have been released, there is enough governance that is happening so that you can have those feedback loops and say that whether your data is doing the right, giving the right information that it is supposed to do, right? Okay, so someone played around with my architecture diagram while redesigning it, because I'm not a great designer for PPT slides. So if you can see, the access information is coming from nowhere. So anyway, so if I have to put it all together, right, so there has to be a specific focus on metadata enrichment, context serving, and agentic network systems, where your context serving needs to have knowledge graph, vectors, searchable systems, etc. And of course, your metadata enrichment setup needs to have all the information that it needs to provide. A shameless plug, there is a second topic that my team is going to talk about in 10 minutes in the hall 2, where we will go deeper into how what I spoke about at a 30,000 feet, they'll go deeper into at a ground level, how do we implement that as well, right? Now, if I have to compare with Formula One, right? So I think traditional data engineers were pipeline mechanics, right? But now modern data engineers are more like race engineers, where they listen to strategic, contextual, and real-time information. They enhance those and build it out, right? They cannot just be looking at, we will build pipelines, and we will sit on the sofa, and we will relax for anything to burn later on. They have to be involved in the process day in, day out. In AI, knowing what data means is as critical as moving it, right? We all know it. And I think we have to move away from being a pipeline builder to strategic enablers in this AI era, right? Oops. So I think a call to action is start designing your pipelines with context as a first-class citizen. And I think I already defined some of those contexts on metadata, business domain knowledge, user personas, business workflows. All of that has to be embedded into your pipeline and not an afterthought. That's a call to action. And I think it's not in F1 also, right? It's not always the fastest car that win. If you have been following last year, McLaren in the second half had the fastest car, but they did not win every single race. Red Bull, my favorite team, also won. And Max Verstappen won the championship as well, right? Although the first half was dominating. But it's also about strategy, it's also about data, it's also about how do you take that data into details, right? So it's not just about building the fastest or the most efficient data platform that has the highest throughput and lowest latency. Now the systems have evolved to more context-driven thinking. Have we cracked it? We haven't. Are we working on it? 100%. So that's all from my side. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.